Lovely and cool with our industrial fan.
Yeah, the South Australian government's pretty much a leader in industrial decarbonising, don't you think, Dermot?
It is. And you're going to find out more when you come here before you come to Adelaide in 2026.
If you want some tips about which vineyards to visit or what part of the city to stay in,
Come here to this event. It's a bit of a hard time early in the morning.
being on Wednesday, it means we've sorted out all the IT issues and the acoustics are awesome and the coffee machine is pumping. Welcome, 10 a.m. Industrial decarbonisation, or hard to abate. So we've got a pretty small panel, small audience, which means there's going to be a group event. If you have questions, just pop your hand up and we might throw some questions over to you. But the first thing to do is to introduce the panel.
Hello, song. Hello, song. Hello, song. Dash.
Hello, God.
Hello,
is that you? So I've picked this topic for industry decarbonisation because, you know, that's, the easy stuff is buildings, right? Buildings, easy. Energy, we kind of know the way. Easy. Transport, 50% easy. So let's talk about the hard stuff, which is industrial decarbonisation. We might as well sort it out before we do Future Made in Australia, right? Yeah, same thing, same thing. So this panel we've assembled here because I've heard people in boardrooms say, wow, this is hard. How do we up new plants, new sites, new skills, new capability? How do we make that leap before it's even economical? So before the economies of scale come in. So this is a solutions-focused panel. We're going to talk about what is it like to de-risk industrial decarbonisation so that the money can flow in. When I pitched this topic, I chose the role of the government, a huge part of the economy when you think about all the public spending and materials and procurement that they do, a huge amount of money, how they can guarantee and de-risk demand. But as I prepared for this topic, I heard a lot more ideas about how demand can be de-risked as a factor so that people can really invest in industrial decarbonisation with confidence. So that's the kind of premise for it. Here are our panellists. Where is this? Where's the IT gods? And what I'll do is I'll get each panelist to introduce themselves, and my question to them is, what's your role in the hard-to-abate industrial sector, and what's your biggest win so far? Okay, so that's the question. And then after that, we're hoping to make this a conversation between us and with you. So just put your hand up whenever you like. So Dermot, you're first.
Good. Thanks, Joan. And great to be here on this panel. My name is Dermot O'Gorman. I'm the CEO of WWF Australia. And I think back in 2018, 2019, the whole narrative around how Australia could be a renewable energy superpower had started to develop. As WWF, we really lent into that frame for the next 4 years. One of the elements of being successful as a renewable energy superpower was our role in the global decarbonisation of the industrial sector, and particularly into some of the metals, and how we use the abundant renewable energy that we could potentially have in Australia to decarbonise global supply chains. And so I think for the last 3 years, particularly in the green steel element, we've been working on with lots of other partners how to do that. So it's 3 years ago, green steel was not really a thing in Australia. Today, everybody's interested in green steel. I think a small win from a WWF viewpoint has been our increasing partnership with our office in Japan and Korea, and increasingly China, on how we work in a cooperative manner with our trading partners to decarbonize between.
Beleza. Isso daí é para...
I don't know. We'll keep going.
Porque o fio ele passa pela essa fita. Ou não tem nada aí?
You can hear me, can't
Não,
you?
mano, olha aí, ó.
Yeah, okay.
Tira,
Thank
porque
you.
olha como já está aqui, ó. Feito o acabamento. Deixa ele entrar. Ele vai pegar. Vai ser rápido.
This-
Então,
Okay. Good. I'll pause there.
Thanks, Dermot. My name's Marcus Dorr. I'm the CEO of MCi Carbon. So we're one of the solution providers that can help the hard-to-abates. Now, hard-to-abates are steel and cement. Typically 15% of global emissions are from just steel and cement. So they have emissions they put straight in the atmosphere, and we have a technology that can take that and stop it going in the atmosphere and transform that into basically materials that then go into the circular economy. So this here, for example, was a steel slag that now makes a low-carbon concrete. And this is from a Brazilian steelmaker, for example. So this is a way to decarbonise the steel industry, the cement industry in one go. And so I'll be talking a little bit more about that. But importantly, we talk about the hard-to-abates, but actually we see them as the ready-to-abates. This is the paradigm has been hard to abate till now, but technologies like us, like MCi's Carbons, has been coming for quite a while. For 13 years we've been in development, and we're now coming out today And yesterday, in fact, we launched our latest technology readiness, our plant that's now turned on in Newcastle, Australia. And now we're looking at partnerships around the world with the steel and cement hard-to-abate customers. So we'll talk a bit further about that.
Thank you. Richie's turn.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. My name's Richie Merzian. I'm the CEO of the Clean Energy Investor Group, which is an industry body that represents the large-scale renewable energy owners right across Australia. And our members own most of the renewables there. And renewables are basically like step one. If you ultimately want to get to the hard to abate or ready to abate, I like that line, Marcus, I'll steal it. The ready to abate, then you need ample, reliable, renewable energy, right? How are we going to build the energy we need to power the processes or whether it's building and making green hydrogen or anything else that's going to be an input into the hard to abate. And Australia's on track right now to hit a majority renewables in the next year or two, and then hopefully go on to 82%. All of that is in order to power a future made in Australia. So how do we make sure that we nail step one so that we can do step 2 and 3?
Well, one of the things I've experienced is, because I'm in the roads and rail sector, and in the billions of dollars that flow through that sector, when the various governments decide to spend 1% of that spend, saying this is the kind of concrete, steel, or the capacity I want on the other side, then that kind of unlocks a huge amount of progress without really expensive standalone programs, if you know what I mean. So Victoria, where I'm from, when the Roads Authority decided their legacy would be to solve the current waste crisis, everyone, research, manufacturing, engineers, landfill, they all mobilized about really cleaning up and finding places for those waste products. So I want the government to recognize that they've got that lever available to them, make really full use of it. So I think a question maybe to you, Richie. Have you seen the way government operates to really push the button on something that's ready to go, just needed that little bit of pressing for suddenly a whole cascade of things to be unlocked?
We're really lucky that we're in a time right now in Australia's climate history where you have a federal government that actually wants to decarbonise.
Woo!
So
Adelaide next
we should
year.
recognise that that's not always the case. In fact, usually that doesn't even last 3 years. But we have a runway right now where we could actually do that.
Yes.
And you have a government that's not only wanting to decarbonise, but is willing to step in and fill in the gaps to get there. And I can speak to the clean energy sector in particular. Yesterday on a panel here, we had Francesco La Camera, who's the head of the International Renewable Energy Agency, the global arena. And he was basically saying globally, they've got issues with connections, contracts, and capacity. Those are the 3 key things we need to transition to clean energy. In Australia, we're doing that. We have a big fund for rewiring the nation, building a grid that will actually have the spokes to actually power out the clean energy across the grid. We have contracting, long-term certainty for generators to build the large-scale wind, solar, batteries, pumped hydro that can actually power it. And we have capacity building, which is how do we provide the energy security services, but also make sure that we can put these things in renewable energy zones to deal with future load opportunities, whether that's on AI, whether that's making green hydrogen, but how do we actually then take that the next step further? Because that's really where it gets quite sexy in terms of Australia's emissions reductions. There we go. I think someone is agreeing with me, but in Portuguese.
So, I mean, what you're talking about is an industry filled with confidence, right? Because we've got someone who's looking and stitching everything together, policy settings. It's really easy to lend money at lower interest rates when you've got that kind of stability and confidence. That's one role of government. I'd love to hear your perspective, Marcus.
Thanks, Joan. Yeah, so the Australian government has played a very big role in our development. We've been funded through 5 successive grants with the federal government for 13 years. That's quite an amazing commitment by the government to a technology that is now world-leading, and that is transforming emissions, capturing and transforming those emissions into materials for the circular economy. When we started, we thought we were a carbon capture technology, but actually what's emerged is the circular economy is driving and, in fact, providing a demand signal that the world's manufacturers want low carbon materials for their own products. And that's what we're racing to achieve. So the government's role in that actually is to create demand signals in their own purchasing. So with, for instance, in New South Wales, we have Transport for New South Wales in one of our projects, which is creating a demand signal and saying, right, in infrastructure projects, we'd like to see a low carbon cement, for example. And this is a way that they can actually encourage competition and not necessarily pick favourites, but encourage that through procurement. So procurement is one angle, but the other is that the early stage technologies need to be sponsored by the government. And we like to see it as this. The governments of the world have a responsibility to accept that they are the lender of first resort to crowd in public other finance, but they're also the insurer of last resort, because climate change and our road to net zero is a public good. And so we need them to accept that, and then to create the policy settings and security around those policy settings for companies like us to survive, but also get to profitability as quickly as possible and to scale.
And one of the things I've heard about big procurement processes, which I'm part of, is when you're trying to do something new, you can't push all the risk onto the new supplier or the person doing the new tech. There's a role for the buyer to share some of that risk. If you can share the risk together, then that gets people up this initial hump, and then you get the value chain that grows out of this new arrangement, as well as economies of scale. Dermot, where do you think government plays a productive role, here or overseas?
Here or overseas? I think that the answer to that question is, as we all know, we're in a global supply chains, and I think it's worth stepping back a bit to this sort of too hard or ready to abate, because for the last 40, 50 years, our job in the world has been to dig stuff up and ship it overseas.
The quarry of Asia is
the
what I'm...
The quarry of Asia, yeah. And so, as a country, as we go through the type of change we're seeing on the global energy transition, the role of AI, we're seeing a rethinking of how industrialization takes place around the world. Robots, low carbon energy. And so you've got people thinking, what is our role in this new ecosystem, which is brand new? And I sort of feel like it's the Netflix dilemma. We've spent 50 years, 100 years building out one system, and now, which is your DVDs, and now the streaming stuff. So I think we're the streaming guys trying to think about how you design for the future world, while we've still got a system that's designed to ship it over, to dig it up and ship it overseas. And so I think partnering with some of our supply chains is really important. So the Australian government engaging with Japan, engaging with Korea, where we produce close to 40% of, for example, in iron ore. We produce 40% of iron ore in the world. They have some of the largest mills. How do we work out an arrangement to de-risk some of the transitions that we're talking about?
So you're talking about, like, let's zoom out and think about what is Australia's role in a global economy, which goes beyond our kind of easy, like, let's dig things up and let's shear some sheep, right? Not to say that those are not important, that's important, but what is the new version of Australia in this economy that's heading towards a low-carbon, circular world? So I did promise audience participation. And we have an audience. Thank you. You're all caffeined up. If you would like to ask a question at any time, put your hand up. I'm pretty good at this on Zoom. Let's see what it's like in real life. Put your hand up if any of this sparks a question, and we'll try to make it more of an audience participation. I'm going to give a 5-second gap. Yes, the man with the lanyard.
Thank you. I'm working with research of energy future from a company called DNV. And unlike the renewable industry, which is performing very well, obviously the heavy industry and hard to abate, hard to electrify, whatever we call it, is more challenging. And one of the reasons is that the solution, both today and also in foreseeable future, is more expensive. Whatever can be electric will be cheaper. Whatever cannot be electric, and we see it domestically in Norway, where I come from also, is more expensive in foreseeable future, being it shipping, aviation, steel, cement, etc. And it's very good if public procurement can unlock and you can ask for mandating green steel in the bridges or whatever. How long is the patience? How much are they willing to invest in order to scale? Because this is not something that in 5 years will be cheap. This is something that will be more expensive than the high carbon solution for 5, 10, 20, maybe forever. And are they willing to sort of keep investing in that for long?
So I've got a great answer to that. So MCi is we believe one of the first technology companies with a business model that has broken through the techno-economic barrier, which is we can make materials from CO2 that have higher value than the cost without a carbon price. And so we're not reliant on carbon price certainty to drive our business model, which many technologies are. So we, reaching technology readiness level 7 now, have proof of technology, which is the barrier to many technologies getting. And that's where governments have a role to get us to there. We are now working with partnerships in Austria. We're working in Japan and Brazil as well, and other countries emerging, and US. And this is really significant because we're now looking at where we can do techno-economic studies that give us certainty, go and build a plant next to an emitter that can create these materials for the local economy. And that itself means we're breaking through the economics. And so we need these pathways, profitable pathways to decarbonise. And that's really what we're seeing. But we need other technologies to get to that scale. We don't need a green premium, many do. And so part of the policy framework is around, well, how do we encourage those that bridge the gap between green premiums and market? And that's around policies, that's around economics, that's around having more patient capital, different types of capital. And that's, again, where the government can play a role with some of the government institutions, sovereign funds and that to crowd in private. But this is a transition. It's not all going to happen now, and we've got a road to that transition. So we're very excited by our technology on that front.
Just to add to that, a decade ago at a climate COP, you would have had very little conversation about industrial decarbonisation. Today, there are a dozen events in COP 30 around this issue. There's a Norwegian one on Saturday, which I'd love to come to. And I think Australia and the Pacific hosting COP 31 next year, which we're definitely going to do. Woo! So please make it happen. The world is a great opportunity to bring a coalition of countries and industries and finances together in Adelaide to address this question, because there are a lot of challenges in this, but the opportunity in the longer term is enormous to decarbonise and to rethink how we the industrialised process.
And I do feel like there is a time when we are going to have to invest more, and it's not going to be as easy as what we're used to, because we're all efficiently set up to do the things that we're used to doing. And so we're awkward and inefficient as we go to a new setting. And I think the question is, how do we pace that? And what do we focus on? So then it becomes a question of what does the economy of our countries need to be, and which winners, which things are we going to pick first, and then which things can we bring faster? So there's a kind of trade-off discussion as well, which I think is quite complicated. Do we have any other questions? Because that was a really good one from the floor, which we could not answer. No one has the answer to this. If anyone says they've got the answer to this, let's blame them for not fixing it yet, okay? Any other questions? We got one here.
Thanks, guys. Hello. Question. I'm from Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And so a lot of conversation around the role of the government. So I guess if there was sort of a role that the government can be doing but isn't doing at the moment, is there any sort of new space that you would like to see the government play a larger part?
So the question is, where does the government have a lever that it could pull harder at the moment? Yeah.
So I think creating demand signals is really the big one, and then the other one is first of a kind funding. So there's two things that we really see as important. So, for instance, our Department of Infrastructure in Australia, billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars of funding with states. That can be pulled through by creating demand signals in collaboration for low carbon, for types of energy. All these projects, they need substantial amount of material, for example. So again, carbon embodied material, low carbon cement standards, and all these kinds of things can be pulled through and those demand signals created. But on the first of a kind funding, it's really significant. So all technologies need to go through a technology readiness development scale, scaling 10 times at each time to be prudent. First of a kind is where you get to the final stage, and that typically is where there is no funding globally for. The infrastructure, VCs, and in between there's a gap, and that's the chasm of death. And so again, government could play a role in that, in providing first funds to crowd in the market to basically push these technologies and these solutions into play. That's really a big area where the government can play a role, and I think all governments around the world should be looking at that.
I think maybe just to add and to sort of build on what Richie said earlier, I think the government at the moment is doing an enormous job to lean into this opportunity across a lot of different sectors, and that's been mirrored by the states as well. So I think Australian states are really making the investments that would play out in terms of infrastructure investments in the states. So I think more of that. One of the analogies I like to use is 7 or 8 years ago, we came up with a export strategy for Australia for arms and weapons. Not so keen on arms and weapons, but the strategy itself from the Australian government came up was very good. And so I think there is an opportunity for the Austrade to really put the foot to the pedal in terms of going out to the rest of the world to be able to selling the capabilities that we have here in Australia, and to be building some of those bridges with our trading partners who eventually are going to want green, decarbed industrial processes across a suite of different things.
The government needs to pick winners. There's an allergic reaction like we have to always be technology neutral. No, we don't. Pick winners. Let's pick a couple of winners and let's go to town, because there's a global race to decarbonize. There's a global race to build the green industries of the future.
If you don't pick a winner, the current winners are the winners, right?
Like, you either have a proactive industry strategy or you don't have an industry strategy, which in and of itself is one as well, which is a laissez-faire approach where you have situations like Rio considering shutting down its aluminium smelter because it doesn't have sufficient energy supply at a price point it wants. So either it happens by default or it happens by design. Design the system you want, design the industries you want, and build on your strengths. If you're a massive iron ore exporter and that's part of your top 3 exports and the other 2 are coal and gas, then pick iron ore, double down, make green iron, partner with Japan and Korea, and use COP31 as the global trade show we know it can be.
Oh, you said it all. One of the other things I've heard, because I talk to transition funds globally who want to invest in Australia, but they only invest $500 million at a pop, right? The investment opportunities are too small, which is why you get all the money going to renewable energy, because you get the $500 million projects. So if we have things that have the business case but aren't of sufficient scale, then there's a bundling role that government can do, yeah? Do you want to say something about that, Richie?
Just one more thing, and this was really interesting. It came up when Jigar Shaw visited. We were just talking about that earlier. When the former head of the Department of Energy's loans program came to Australia, he said, you can't punish people for not being able to fill out forms and going through the rigmarole of government processes. Find the projects you want. Go find the companies that are leading. Help them work through the paperwork. Help them find out where the other obstacles are in the government processes, and that there always are, whether that's in planning or transport or taxation. Work it through and actually pull them into the system. And it's a real proactive strategy that I think we haven't really nailed in the past, but we're going to have to nail going forward.
I'll just add to that. MCi was looking globally for customers, and we found one in Austria as our first customer. And what happened very quickly, subsequently, is our energy ministers between Austria and Australia got together and said, well, how about we try and speed the path to technologies like ours in between countries, so bilaterally. And so a fund was, a public fund was created between two of the countries. We applied for it and we won that. But what that does is it lowers the barrier, smooths the way, and this kind of speed to market.
Concierge.
Concierge, absolutely. But also paving a way, removing the barriers. Actually, one of government's role is to get out of the way as well. So, but also pave the way and get out of the way. And I think that's really, one of the, it doesn't have to be contradictory. It can be actually quite enabling.
Brilliant. Question from the floor.
Hi, at the risk of being too MCI focused, but my name's Sophia Hamblin Wong. We often pointed towards.
Closer.
We often talk about scaling technologies up to first of a kind, and in the past 5 years, we looked at America. They created an Office for Clean Energy Demonstrations, which deployed hundreds of millions of dollars, like more than $150 million to projects to get up to that commercial readiness. But we have seen this year alone trillions of dollars of that funding being taken away from our competitors in America. But we did always point towards these programs as being world leading and helping the Australian government to think about the way that we could succeed by emulating that. So I would say in the absence of that example, where in the world is leading in your different industries? Where are the beacons of hope that we can emulate in Australia?
It's a really good question. And I don't naturally go to any one country and say they are a beacon of hope in this process. And I think the reason is this is the biggest energy transition that we've had in 100 years, since the second industrial revolution. No one knows exactly how it plays out. And so I think there are lots of examples from around the world where you're seeing really sensible strategies from governments to try and shore up energy security, work out the type of technologies that they need to solve these industrial problems, transform their industry depending on where they are and what's happening in terms of the geopolitics of supply chain. So the US is one. China is often talked about. Look, that's a 25-year strategy which they're playing. I think a number of the European countries are doing some really interesting stuff. Singapore is doing some really interesting work in the financial sector. So I think lots of examples from around the world into this space. But I guess my overall message here is it's not about picking winners. There is only one winner. The renewables is the winner in this space. It's sad if you were on the losing side, but coal and gas is on the losing side. It's a long game, but you have to call that out and say, that is not our future. If we stay that, we're going to be much worse off in the long term. So I think those two narratives that Richie said is super important. And then it's really around this opportunity that we're talking about today and our role in the global supply chains of how we're going to do that. And if I finish on one point, there is so much money that you talked about in the world, government, private sector, that are looking for sovereign countries that are safe, that can deliver the right type of ecosystem for business to operate. And I think in the last year we've seen dozens of American companies turn up in Australia saying, how can I do business in this country? And I think that's the type of opportunity we need to be seizing.
I'll give a very small example in my space, which is roads and rails. So in the Netherlands, they have the rail sector said, government, stop asking for our carbon data and our performance in all these different ways. Tell us one way to do it, and we'll all do it because we all want to do it. And so in the Netherlands, they came up with this scheme called the CO2 Performance Ladder, which is a maturity ladder for the organization. The interesting thing about it is if you're at level 5 of the ladder and you bid in something for $1 million, they'll assess it as if you bid in $950,000. And so your financial criteria is better if you can demonstrate higher carbon performance. And the higher up on the ladder, the more financial advantage you have in a procurement. In the end, you get all the, the money that you bid in, but you can really see how carbon is valued in a procurement process. And every public procurement asks for the same information. And so it really encourages an organization that's tendering across all the different sectors to organize themselves and invest in their systems and invest in their data in exactly the same way. So consistency is like a little point that you can press to unlock a lot of activity.
So I'd agree with that. The global standards, national standards, local standards are all required, especially for low carbon materials for us. So cements and concretes, we need to have durability, we need to have all kinds of factors, but we can't all do it individually at our own pace. We need to have like the ISO standards, emerge globally to help the local standards accord. And we're involved in some of those committees. Like, everyone needs to be involved in these who are at the forefront. And it's really, really, significant. The other one is financing. And so the answer to all of our problems actually is capital. And we need blended financing. We need to have, governments coming as first lender of first resort, crowding in others and taking some risk out. Things like this. These models are very, very critical. Power purchasing agreements, new models. Cost of capital based on bond plus success fee, for example. That's a good model for a project financing. We need to see these emerge.
Questions from the floor? Anyone? Yes, a hand up at the back. Here comes the microphone. Hold it right up to your mouth.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Is this good? Yes. How do you suggest or recommend reducing the cost of capital and reducing the cost of like green alternatives, so like green cement, for example, decarbonized cement, which it can be cost competitive at scale, but there's just the heavy first of a kind actually developing it at scale, and then if there aren't regulations yet, or if construction workers aren't incentivized or told they have to buy it, how do you get it to a point where it is the lowest cost option and then it will be the obvious option for everyone, not just because they have to achieve a certain like decarbonized goal in their project?
Look, that's a great question. That's like exactly where MCi is right now, and that is we're doing trials, field trials with major construction groups in Australia and other countries, with government observance as well, which is really, really important. So the first of a kind that I said, the first of a kind funding is critical because it gets us over that barrier to actually get to where we are cost competitive. And we believe that the best solutions are those that are the easiest choice because they're the best and they're not they don't require a green premium. So in the cement industry, these are starting to emerge. The new SEMs, for example, are starting to emerge. Scale is always the challenge, but you're not going to get to scale unless you are on the scale path. So it's that making sure that the good technologies have a path to go. What the tragedy is that technologies lose funding or just lose the chasm of death where they have potential, but there's just no capital. And a company that is unable to get funded, if they run out of money, they lose momentum. And so we really need to assure that these technologies and these solutions can get to market. And government, playing a role in that as an observer, as a standards body, creating those demand signals is really, really critical.
I might add to that because it is a really great question, and I'm going to go to the building sector for an example, because 6 years ago, the New South Wales government in Australia worked on an alliance with WWF and a suite of the building industry to come up with an alliance around embedded and low carbon materials for building. It's called MECLA. And so this is now today 350, 400 companies along the building supply chain, from the big end of town right down to small producers. Yep. And it's a pre-competition platform for building skills across the sector on what does low carbon look like in my bid. And so you've got competitors in there talking and learning about, as professionals, how do I do this? and then they go out in the marketplace and compete to produce that. But that pre-competition, building capabilities in your industry is something that it takes 3 or 4 or 5 years to do, but then you really see the benefits. And I think we can apply this to the industrialized sector as well.
It's also, I'm just going to add this. Oh, I got hands up. Great, this is great. It's also fair to say that the cost of money relates to risk, right? Risk and time. So if you can make things happen faster, you don't have to pay interest as long. If you can make everything really stable and predictable, yeah, Ricky's nodding. You want to add anything about that? Cost is the same as risk.
Oh, we're just seeing this in the wind industry now in Australia, where you've seen supply costs go up, cost of capital has gone up for a wind project now. And so there's two solutions, right? We could find, diversify supply chains. We could try and change a few of the metrics around where we get our capital pool, or we could actually reduce the planning time it takes to get a wind farm through, which is right now up to 10 years, right? So, and that's within the government's control because they're all processes that are either at the federal or state level. So it's just looking at the different metrics we can tweak to get the balance sheet right on some of these projects.
And so maybe the role of government is, if money is tight, which it is, time. What can we do to make time crunch? All right, I got 3 questions. You in the striped shirt.
Thanks so much. Just building on the previous question, so I'm a councillor where I live, and we just had our climate strategy adopted, and the biggest challenge for us at the moment is the green premium to really implement things as quick as possible and have more ambitious action. So I guess building on that previous question, what would be your advice for councils to try to decarbonise our communities as quick as possible and sort of leverage that, and how to actually partner or work together to actually bring the change a lot quicker than what's happening now?
I'll take the, because we had so many hands up, we'll do more than one question at a time and then we'll pick them all up.
Building on that confidence, how do we bring our due diligence processes with climate and human rights together as we build up those supplier teams, right? Too often I see procurement teams come along, build up the process with their suppliers, weed out instances of modern slavery in the supply chain, build up capacity to report on scope 3 for environment. Procurement team comes along and says, that supplier's too expensive right now, let's get them. Cut them off the budget, let's restart the whole process with a new supplier. How do we build that capacity with the supplier at human rights and climate at the same time? Thanks, Joan.
Walk and chew gum. Oh dear. All right, last one.
Just building on the comment on MECLA in Australia, where I think you're world leading in terms of, I'm from the cement and concrete industry globally, and you've got a MECLA, one of the cement and concrete, and version 2 is going to come out in a couple of months' time, which is actually globally harmonised. So I hear a lot of Australian voices around here, but if you're not from Australia and you're interested in what MECLA have done, actually to save time, we've got a global low carbon rating system for cement and concrete, basically the same as what MECLA has done, and it does everything that you just said.
All right, so we've got, let's learn from the global standard. I think I saw the concrete cement aggregates talking about that in Australia, so that's good. A question about councils and a question about how can we deal with human rights and other dimensions of good alongside climate. I might just pick up the councils one myself, and who else wants to do a council one? Okay, we've got 2 council, human rights and standards. Amazing. All right, so council first. Richie, go.
Yep. It's a great question, Cal. Like, the demand from a single council might not be sufficient, right, to have the economy of scale. And that's where the state or the feds could play a bigger role, which is actually having procurement at scale, kind of like they're doing with clean energy, getting the scale in there, which means that they can pass down the costs for smaller purchases. Like basically playing that broker role so you can actually build off the demand for a news, because unless you've got a big contract to supply and you're coming into the market with a new tech that has a premium because it's greener, then you need to make sure that you've got a good supply on the other side of that in order to build the tech to get there.
That is a great response, Richie. I don't need to add anything to that. Now you can go human rights.
So the human rights question, I think, is spot on because we can't go through this decarbonisation of the industrialised process without addressing, I think, 2 elements. In addition to that, the first one is the human rights and the workers' rights, etc. And the second one then is to be nature positive. And so I think you talked a little bit about circular economy. I think thinking through and having human rights, nature, and the decarb as a linked system, so you don't end up with 3 different systems trying to verify that you're able to simplify. And I think the role that AI will play in that, in certification schemes over the next decade, will transform the way that we're able to look down supply chains and also verify everything to do with, nature, carbon, and people.
And often, if you have the right solution, you solve all 3 problems at the same time. Yeah. So, I mean, there is a data burden, of course, because governance requires us to hold ourselves accountable, which requires data. Thank goodness for AI in this instance. But I heard Sophie St. John, who's a nature leader now at Pollination, say, not everything that we do that's good for carbon is good for nature, but everything we do that's good for nature is good for carbon. So there are, if you think very carefully, the solutions can solve 3 problems at the same time. And nature solutions are nothing without the traditional custodians of those lands, right? Those aren't real solutions without them.
Look, I'll just add to maybe all 3 points, and that is the Sustainable Development Goals, which we should not forget, and indeed MCi Carbon is intrinsically working on. The Banksia Foundation in Australia is the leading UN Compact organisation. A couple of years ago, we won the National Award for Sustainability around circular economy, and we're very privileged to have won that. We hadn't even considered SDGs before we were, in that community. And when we looked at the 17 SDGs, MCi, we realised, is working on 11 of those. And it gives us quite heart to understand that, we come from an impact approach, we come from a values-driven approach, and at the centre of everything is collaboration. We cannot solve all these problems, we cannot get our projects done, we can't integrate with local councils and get social licence unless we are actually collaborating and we are values-led. And that's really, significant for us. So, with MECLA, and we're very proud, foundation member in MECLA and sharing information amongst the community that it's pre-commercial, but it's significant that we can tell our stories, we can build on them, we can drive forward on the things that can be done earlier on. We're building our own roadmaps, and this is really, really important for us. And for MCi, we're on a mission, actually, which is the other side of it, is to have commitment of your people. People are going to solve climate change, and we should not forget that. That's the people of the world, and it's the collaboration and how we do things is important. So I'll leave you with that.
I remember asking someone at Goldman Sachs who was talking to me about sustainable investment, and they said, well, one of the main benefits of that is that we keep our people, because our people really, really want to do this. And that's one of the drivers for their investment in sustainability. We have time for more questions. There was another hand. Oh.
Well, no, do that. Get more questions. You also have basically the entire Australian media here at the COP in the crowd as well, I see. So could be some media questions as well. I want to add just one last thing, which is not to poo-poo your question. It's a great question, right? But there is like a sweet spot to trying to do everything, which is also making sure that you hit speed and scale. Because that's also that's the ultimate challenge in terms of decarbonising. It's speed and scale. Otherwise, we're not going to get anywhere close to 1.5. And so, have the right standards. Make sure that you've got the good tech. Tick all the boxes, and then calibrate. Because if it's taking too long, and a good example is local procurement. There's these local procurement requirements in there sometimes, which are good because you want to make sure that you can add value, build local capacity. But if you get to a point where there is insufficient local suppliers to get a project off the ground, then you have to figure out where you can calibrate. So just making sure, not spruiking the entire abundance agenda, but there are some little nuggets of truth in there about making sure that you also maintain speed and scale.
We elect people to make trade-offs, right? To make choices. And then right now, climate change is a burning platform. I think that we are here, we've made a choice. That the umbrella is a climate umbrella.
I just wanted to pick up on the first of its kind discussion. I do feel like we're at an inflection point where a lot of the industrial decarb technologies are working at demonstration scale. There's some other exciting things happening in industrial steam and storage. Technologies in Australia of great promise there as well. I don't think, though, that it's a capital problem in the missing middle that's being talked about, but rather a returns versus risk problem. And the reality is a more honest conversation needs to be had about, candidly, how challenging the returns are for a first commercial plant. Given that, and Australia has been actually very good at early grant funding to get technologies through prior to this stage, do you see there being a role for first of its kind occurring domestically in Australia, supported by someone like NRF, etc.? Or is it more to be, you mentioned Austria, for example, is it about taking your technology to where your industrial partners are able to share some of the risk on the buy side, not just the supply side of the technology? Just wondering whether we can have a sort of a more candid conversation about how challenging it is to get those first plants built.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. I think the answer is either, both. There can be different models, whether or not, say, Australian finance or Australian governments provide the first, 25%, for example, and then crowd in, or indeed the projects might be overseas, in which case you might be, co-investing with others. But there needs to be a model that it has, returns are where it's at. Every piece of capital has an expected rate of return and a risk profile. That's the reality. In our kind of technologies that are emerging, we don't actually understand what they are, typically. Climate bonds are one way to do that, where successful technologies or implementations first of a kind, if they're really successful, they have a higher coupon rate. But there's a guarantee on return for those who come in, for example. Very simple. Those are the kinds of models. Also, different types of equity. It could be debt equity, for example. Those kinds of models. We don't really have a lot of experience around those because we've always been experienced. We have venture and we've got infrastructure, and kind of in between, there's a big gap. But I actually think the time is now to develop those models.
Yeah, I mean, two examples where I think there's potential to do that. First one in, for example, green iron ore. So how do you work with Japan or Korea if you're going to onshore green iron ore to Australia and work with the Korean steel industry? That's a very complex question, and if you haven't addressed the risk and return, the equity issues in how that will play out, you're just going to hit roadblocks the whole way through that process. So I think that's one example. Pick a winner. Yeah. The second one is to call out one Australian state who has done the hard yards on this for the last 20 years in a bipartisan way. And so South Australia next year will be the first state to be pretty much 100% renewables. And they have a lot of investment strategies into first movers in South Australia as well. And so I think that's a good example of an Australian state who has doubled down on both the investment but the innovation type elements of this too. So, and of course is going to host COP31 next year, and we can demonstrate that to the world.
Anything you want to add, Richie? Oh, good. I think I've been given the wind up. So for my last question for the panel, is there another session that you want to recommend to our panelists to go to so that you can continue this thread of thought? So I might start with Richie.
Great question, Joan, to end on. Thank you very much. On Monday here at 4 p.m, there will be an event. South Australia, which Dermot was just talking to. They're Denmark down under. Because South Australia, like Denmark, has the highest variable renewables in the world for a standalone, decent-sized grid. And it's gone coal to gas to 70% renewables. It is on a track to hit 100% in a year and a half, just before it'll host COP31 next year in partnership with the Pacific. But it's going to use that clean energy, coupled with its iron ore reserves, coupled with its existing capabilities, to hopefully build a green iron industry as well, in partnership with the Asia Pacific. Because a future made in Australia is a future made with Asia. And if you want to learn more about what COP31 entails, come along 4 p.m. on Monday, and there'll be drinks afterwards.
Nice, Brooke. Any other recommendations?
I just had to look it up. On the 15th, there is a catalyzing global demand in green steel in the Finnish pavilion, hosted by the European Union, WWF, the Industrial Decarbonisation Initiative, and the Climate Leader Council. Very interesting discussion around exactly in one particular area of decarbonisation, how it might look out.
It sounds like we need industrial decarb as a stream in COP31, I think.
We do, and so I'll leave on my recommendation. So tomorrow at 10:30 there's another session here in the Australian Pavilion, which is on the just transition, which is the really kind of encompasses a lot what we're talking about here. And that will be hosted by LinkedIn. So it's very much a people and transition-oriented panel. I'll be speaking on that, so a bit of self-interest, but actually it's very, very important. Just transition is essential, and it's core to what MCi does. We have 55 engineers who have come off coal projects, come off remote mines, and they're all moved back to Newcastle, which is where we have a technical headquarters. We're very proud that these people can come, work on a technology that they are very proud of, be on a mission that, you know, and they're transitioned away from the fossils towards the solution. And, you know, keeping our eye on the just transition is, you know, for me as the founder, co-founder of MCi, and been in this for 18 years, takes you 20 years to develop a technology like ours, just transition is front and center. So we recommend you come to that session as well.
And for me, eyeballing the program, there's a global cement and concrete aggregates and investment for low carbon at the We Mean Business Council Pavilion at 4:30 p.m. today. It's a boardroom discussion. You can rock up, but because it's a boardroom, you might want to arrive early. Yeah, good. All right, thank you everyone for coming. Spread the word. COP31, Adelaide next year.
COP31 Adelaide, Australia. We're gonna host it. Come with us.